Good evening and welcome to this edition of DeFacto Review, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories shaping Mongolia. Here with us tonight is our commentator, economist, Jaragat of DeFacto.
Good evening.
And my name is Dilgong. We're live on Facebook at V Television, and we want to hear your thoughts, so send us your comments on Twitter with hashtag Jaragat_DeFacto coming up on the program. A working group was established to discuss an increase in minimum wage rate. Four banks raised 128.7 billion turks in equity to cover its capital shortfalls. World Hepatitis Day was commemorated on July 28th. On Friday, Vios Akçay, a Turkish teacher, was abducted. The Ministry of Labor and Social Protection proposed to set the minimum wage rate at 300,000 turks, which is an increase of 60,000 from the current level of 240,000. So what do you think is, how should the appropriate minimum wage rate be actually calculated?
Well, in the country like Mongolia, where certain inflation quite more than the ordinary normal economy, which is to be about 2-3% a year, which is regard normal inflation rate, but in a country like Mongolia, 8%, at times it was way higher. At certain moment, the certain standard of wages are not meeting the minimum required vitamins or minerals that is needed for the body. And that's why Mongolia had this now habits of many other countries establishing minimum wage, which was, as you said, 240 since 2014,000, 240,000 since 2014, and the related minister suggested that they will increase now to 300,000, though trade unions suggest to increase to 350,000. And also this will be minimum wage from September from now, but from next year they will increase salary for public officers. And the government have been discussing the possibility of this increase with the IMF, which has extended fund facilities to Mongolia. So of course, if money is not enough, one is to increase the salary, in particular for teachers and the nurses. I understand. But however, before increasing salary, we should know from where we should take the money. And the money can be created only in two ways, or taken in two ways. One, increase tax. The other is just printing money, or borrowing more money from the central bank, which usually ends up of printing more money. So which way we to select, that is to be clear first. Second, because this minimal wage is increased, the private companies have to increase also for people they hire for temporary basis for 4 hours, for example. Because minimum wage, it calculates, it goes down to 240,000 Turkish minimum wage valid now. It means it is this is what 1,430 Turkish, and it means if it is 300K, then it will be 1,790 Turkish per hour. That means about 74 cents based on the current exchange rate. If you take the now South Korea, which has the same also law, minimum hourly wage, this is 7,531, and the won is now 1,115 won is $1. That means the South Korean workers should receive $6.75 per hour, which is 9 times more, 8 to 9 times higher than Mongolians. That's the reason why the Mongolians want to go to South Korea to work. So for a country like Mongolia, all this also has to do with the our currency exchange rate, the quality of Mongolian tugriks. So that's why they are increasing.
And how do you think an increased minimum wage rate will impact the economy?
This is substantially. First of all, increasing this minimum wage means up to 60,000 tugriks related taxes will be disappearing. They will, because the minimum wage is not taxed in terms of income tax, in terms of this social insurance. So I was calculating in around, say, 13 or so billion tugriks we need, 14 billion tugriks we need per year to pay, for example, salaries of 192 public officers. So where this money is coming from, that should be very clear, because either it should be taxed or it should be decreasing the other costs. Which one is the government is going to do is not clear. They're not announcing that. Of course, a salary, first of all, should be connected with productivity of a company, of a country, of any industry. And but unfortunately, the productivity in Mongolia is not increasing because we are not creating new competitive branches of economy. We keep talking a lot about diversification, but very little done. Still, we are so much dependent on copper and coal price. So that's why if it keeps going like this, it may more trigger inflation. That's what we're worried about.
And some other influencing factors of minimum wage rate is GDP growth as well as inflation. So how can our current GDP growth validate the increase in minimum wage, and how will it also impact inflation?
Well, first of all, as we said, the inflation is the result of government work. Okay? Bad work and bad inflation. Why? Because government, state does not create value. They distribute values through taxation. And for example, if government is, say, constructing road or making hospital, then if they are going through taxation, tax increase, or using tax, then the person who is paying tax will now consume less because he had paid. As a result, the general demand for the particular product will not increase. It may even decrease. Then there is no chance to increase prices because the demand is going down. So you cannot increase price. So if it is through taxation, it's normal in the economy. But if it goes through printing money or borrowing money, that makes impact. Because some people are taking advantage, because now the same amount of goods, but purchasing capacity are larger. So what they do, they increase price. So that's why inflation in a way is a taxation. Inflation is a work by the government. And in a certain way, it's kind of a stealing certain values from those who could not buy. So that's why we need to be very careful. As in history, many things happened like this in many countries. In 1923, it was in Germany, where 1 mark was 4.2 billion marks. Recently, the case of Zimbabwe, they had to print the banknote of 1 trillion or even $100 trillion Zimbabwe dollar. And so at the end, money is worthless, and they have to change money. And now, this year, classic example, Venezuela, their inflation is going to be 1,000,000% according to IMF at the end of this year. So this sort of not careful spending, not a lot spending or borrowing from the central bank, printing money, creates triggers inflation.
And moving on to our second topic of the night, following an asset quality review conducted by the Bank of Mongolia, it was revealed that the banking sector needs to raise around 2% of GDP, or around 510 billion turuks in equity, and banks are given until the end of 2018 to rectify this. And currently, 4 banks have raised enough money, and which is a quarter of the loop. So why do you think there was this shortfall of 510 billion turuks?
They have increased only by 128, which is a quarter of required money for increasing owner's equity capital. And Mongol Bank had announced 4 banks. But I think this is not enough for customers, because citizens want to know which banks have increased equity, owner's equity, and which have not, because it's the main concern of our who has saving accounts in these commercial banks. And the saving accounts owners have to right to know how the banks are doing with the increase of owner's equity. Owner's equity increase is required because these assets of these banks, or at least the quality of assets, are require more owner's equity capital. So we need to know. Mongol Bank wants keep it secret under the name of stabilization of the system, banking system. They should have a certain responsibility, because what happens if these banks will not be able to save the savings of the people? So people want to know now from who and how. Another thing, because in Mongolia, saving insurance corporation exists. And that is, according to our law, they give insurance for only up to 20 million turik saving, which is roughly less than $8,000 or so US dollar only. Which means people who has more money than 20 million turiks, they will lose everything. Even if you have several accounts in one bank, they will get together as a one account, and you will lose many things. So, and that's why the Mongol Bank is to be responsible for all people who have a saving account. Okay, so 20,000 is not 20 million turiks. Saving insurance is not enough money for maintaining normal conditions of the system.
And you just mentioned that 128.7 billion was raised. So how was it raised, and where did this money exactly come from?
Well, that's exactly the questions, because that's what the Mongol Bank does not announce. Well, compared with the previous management, current Mongol Bank has a different approach to public and social media. They give every month press conference, they release facts, they explain people why and how. And this time they did it last week, and they announced about this increase of a quarter of what is demanded by the end of the year. But according to your questions, we want to know which owner's equity, because there is certain owner's equity classifications. First owner's equity classification is basic, or first tier equity capital, where we take is the owner's money, shareholders' money, and profit that they are coming from the bank itself. So this is the first tier equity. Whether these 127 billion turiks are coming from this, it's one matter. Second matter is it's additional or second tier owner's equity, which means it is a revaluation of assets of commercial banks, which mostly probably is consisting of certain collaterals they have, they own, they keep, or certain other assets they own. They're revaluing this asset. The second thing in this second tier equity capital is secondary payable, which is, say, if somebody is borrowing money from somebody for 5 years, the bank is borrowing from somebody a large sum, which is say more than 1 year, 5 years, and this loan can be converted into equity afterwards. Then they regard it as secondary payable, and they can classify it as a owner's equity. If this 127 billion Turkish that Mongol Bank is announcing, commercial banks have increased, if this money belongs to the secondary equity, that's less reliable than the first tier equity. And saving account holders have full right to know of each bank whether they are increasing their owner's equity. One. Second, which classification of which part of this owner's equity is increased. And then accordingly they can make their own decisions. They have a full right to know and to make own decisions about their own assets they have in the bank. So this is the approach from, I think, from ordinary saving account holders.
And moving on to our third topic.
Before, I would like to just add another point here. Mongolia had recently adopted a law that allows state inject money in case the commercial banks cannot increase their owner's equity, own capital by the end of this year. But this raises one concern. If government injects our money, taxpayers' money, into the bank's equity, because in the balance of equity you cannot have interest rate, etc. It is not saving, it's equity. Those banks who cannot increase their equity on time, they have a much better advantage compared with their competitors who can raise this money from their own capital. Why? Because the money is, if the owner can buy back that shares, which is supported by our taxpayers' money, then they have a huge advantage. They can buy it after 2-3 years without any paying commercial interest rates. So what is fair is this: once state injects shares to this bank, this share should not go back to the original owners who could not raise. Either it goes to foreign banks, or it should be a public company. And from this public company, you should sell shares, new shareholders coming, and then this money is coming back to the state coffin from where they have taken. So only with this understanding, the people accept the government injection into the commercial banks who are not doing good jobs. That's the reason why they have their asset quality had decreased. So that's the important point Mongolians should know about the banking equity capital increase. Let's go to the third.
And the third topic was Mr. Akshay was briefly abducted on Friday in what appeared to be like the latest episode of a global campaign by the Turkish president to capture suspected allies of the exiled cleric accused of plotting a 2016 coup. Several hours after the abduction, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement saying that the government of Mongolia had ordered the grounding of the Turkish chartered aircraft, which was about to take Mr. Akçay away to Turkey. And it also said that the seizure of Mr. Akçay constitutes as an unacceptable act of violation of Mongolia's sovereignty and independence, which Mongolia strongly objects against. What are your thoughts on this event?
Strangely, the Minister of Foreign Affairs at least didn't know. Then the government did not know because the Prime Minister had made a statement. Everything Mongolians learned was around 12 o'clock. The Mongolian director of the Turkish school made a statement that his Turkish teacher was kidnapped. In front of his house, a black car came and arrested him. And his wife called, or immediately they know, they made a statement. Then so soon, in 1 hour, this jet is coming to our airport, and people go there. Many graduates from Turkish schools go there, mainly because now Turkey, after this coup d'etat, where they blame the Gulen, a person in the U.S., is blamed, and he created big network of schools all around the world in 150 countries, I understand, and all this system, all these institutions under his leadership is blamed by President Erdogan, which is not accepted by the US. That's why they are not extraditing this Gulen person. Now, however, Turkey is keep arresting school teachers from around the world, which they did last year exactly in Kazakhstan in the same way they tried in Mongolia, in Kosovo, and this year they tried. And now ordinary Mongolian citizens are asking questions. Why foreign security officers are coming, arresting somebody on the territory of Mongolia, even their own person? Because if we don't have a clear picture, now question is arriving, does Mongolian authority knew? Yes, of course, they knew, I think. Otherwise, how they can make such an intervention into the sovereign country? First, if they knew, why the other branch of the power didn't know? And why people did not want him to go back, with very simple reason, is because Mongolia is a member of the international conventions against fighting against torture. In 2000, we became a member, and it says that if there is enough basis of guessing or thinking that this person will be investigated and will be tortured back in their own country, no nation should give back that person to that authority of that country. That's what the convention is about. So people, based on our understanding, we believe that, like many other several thousand, 70,000 people are now in prison. They are tortured. According to the International Human Rights Watch, Transparency International, recently there was a report in New York Times also with statistics, that we have a full basis to assume that Mr. Akçay is going to be tortured. So the ordinary Mongolians, they raised their voice, they demanded the government is not allowing to do so. As a result, this plane of special purpose came to Mongolia and then arrested him and then left him. And Mr. Akçay went to police for opening a file of criminal case of kidnapping a person on the territory of Mongolia. So I think just the ordinary people did a good job. The United States Special Rapporteur on Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment visited Turkey in November 2016 after the coup d'etat, and they found that the torture was widespread at that time, a year and a half ago. And following the failed coup, particularly at the time of arrest and subsequent detention. So that's what the report was saying. So we have to believe in this UN rapporteur about that. So I think Mongolia just was the case where it is a democratic country where the power belongs to the people, not to the elected officials. Who is, if they are doing against the will of people, they will be taken into responsibility. Somehow we will be having demonstration. But of course there will be certain other, the interesting thing, there was a statement by the ambassador of Turkey after foreign minister, deputy foreign minister called him. What happened? He said, we have done nothing other than, we have done nothing violating laws of Mongolia. That's what he said. And that means Mongolian authority, related agencies have been cooperating with the Turkish authority. Otherwise it will be classified completely differently. My concern is in our constitutions, in any cases, there are several absolute provisions in the constitutions which is not to be changed under any circumstances, including the hard time, what to say that, the restricting time of actions of people. And it says even under these conditions, even war regime, we should not violate, or we should not have we should not fail the dignity of the person. We should not torture a person, even in a prison. That's our constitution's demand. So Mongolian people have demanded their constitutional rights. And unfortunately, there were cases that Mongolian authorities were given back to Chinese authority, Inner Mongolians who were running to Mongolia and asking political freedom, and they have given back. They have their political motivation, different opinion, and then they have back, and some of them have disappeared. So one thing is, okay, it's a poor country. We receive help from other countries, but at which cost? Because if we allow this person have taken to Turkey back and had tortured, the same thing can happen to anybody, any of us. So basically, it was not the case of only Mr. Akçay. It was the case of any Mongolians who one day is to be surely not be tortured. That's what the whole will of the people was 2 days ago.
And moving on to our final and fourth topic of the night, viral hepatitis B and C are major health challenges which affect over 325 million people globally. And they're the root causes of liver cancer, which leads up to around 1.34 million deaths per year. And the Mongolian government has taken a couple of preventative measures by implementing a couple of programs that are focused on detecting, diagnosing, and treating these kind of diseases. So what kind of changes do you think should be made in the healthcare financing system to reduce hepatitis, which is a prominent disease in Mongolia?
Well, the whole world is celebrating as we speak today about the World Hepatitis Day 2018, because hepatitis is a disease that makes liver so sick and then usually cause cancer, and it goes silently. People usually discover it very late. And according to this WHO statistics, 90% of the people don't know they have this hepatitis C or B. So we are part of it. Mongolia is taking the first place by amount of people sick per 100,000 people. Almost 350,000 people have hepatitis, viral hepatitis B and C. And I was running one of the round table of that WHO large forum in Mongolia, and which we were celebrating achievements of Mongolia in this regard, in spite of the large amount of hepatitis B or C sick people. Turned out Mongolia has now a program that we are now inspecting each citizens. Last year was 350,000 people were checked, and 53,000 of them turned out to be sick. Because they are discovering the sickness earlier, they have a more chance to be cured faster. So Mongolia is on the right path, but we have a lot of things to do. And first of all, Mongolian citizens to know that they must go to check whether they have the viruses of C and B hepatitis, viral hepatitis. If they have, C can be, if they have not, they should receive injections. Vaccinations which prevent completely, prevent from everything. If they have the hepatitis C, there is certain treatment now. They have discovered it 2015, which is a good chance for people who has these diseases. Or hepatitis B, which takes also years to have treated well, but both are available, and now it's a time for Mongolians to understand the importance of this hepatitis B and C, which causes liver cancer. And I think the government is doing, this one and the previous one, both doing a good job in this regard.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us for this week's DeFacto Review. Please join us next week at the same time for another weekly roundup of the biggest stories shaping Mongolia. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good evening.